Today, we're looking at the most epic betrayals in all of human history, starting with number 1, Brutus and Caesar. The most famous betrayal in human history didn't happen in secret. It happened in broad daylight on the floor of the Roman Senate, where a bunch of men in togas jumped the most powerful man in the world, stabbed him 23 times, and declared, "You're welcome." But let's rewind, because this wasn't just politics. It was personal, especially for the guy who struck the final blow, Marcus Junius Brutus. He wasn't some jealous senator with a grudge. He was Caesar's BFF. So how did the noblest man in Rome end up assassinating the guy who trusted him the most? It starts with a name. Brutus came from a legendary family line. One of his ancestors literally founded the Roman Republic by kicking out the last king. That ancestor also executed his own sons for trying to bring the monarchy back. Tough crowd. So, growing up, Brutus was basically haunted by family expectations. People would leave notes on his public podium that said things like, "You're not a real Brutus," which, I gotta say, is a pretty brutal form of peer pressure. But Brutus wasn't some meathead politician. He was a serious, sleep-deprived, stoic philosopher who wrote books with titles like On Virtue, On Duty, and How Not to Catch Feelings When You Murder Your Mentor. Okay, maybe not that last one. He was also really torn. Because, yeah, he believed in the Republic, a system of checks and balances with no kings allowed. But he also genuinely liked Caesar. And Caesar? He loved Brutus. Gave him powerful roles, protected him in battle, trusted him more than almost anyone. Some ancient gossip even claims Caesar was Brutus's biological dad, which would make this whole story even messier. Thank you, Roman drama. Now, Caesar wasn't exactly hiding his ambitions. He'd crossed the Rubicon, crushed his rivals, and declared himself dictator for life. At one point, during a public festival, his buddy Mark Antony literally tried to crown him. Caesar refused, 3 times for dramatic effect, but everyone got the message. And the Senate, not thrilled, especially when Caesar started acting like he was too good to stand when they entered the room. For Romans, that was worse than getting ratioed online. So Brutus is stuck. On one side, his beliefs, his ancestors, and half the Senate whispering, "Do something." On the other, Caesar, the man who practically raised him. For weeks, he's a wreck, can't sleep, won't talk. His wife literally stabs herself in the thigh just to prove she's tough enough to handle whatever secret he's hiding. And yes, that worked. Eventually, Brutus gives in. A conspiracy is already brewing, led by Cassius, a man who hated Caesar's guts. But Cassius knew something. They need Brutus. Without him, it's just a murder. With him, it's a noble cause. The descendant of the Republic's founder has to be the one to drive the knife in. So that's the plan. On March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, Caesar walks into the Senate. He's been warned not to go. His wife had nightmares. The priests saw bad omens. And Caesar? He just got over being kidnapped by pirates a few years earlier, during which he famously told them to raise his ransom because he was worth more than that, which is, admittedly, a pretty baller move. Anyway, Caesar goes in. He sits down. One senator grabs his toga. Another stabs him in the neck. Chaos erupts. More than 60 senators are in on it, and Caesar tries to fight back, even stabs one guy with his writing pen. But it's no use. Then he sees Brutus. And whether or not he actually said, "Et tu, Brute," doesn't matter. What mattered was the look, the betrayal, the realization that the man he trusted most was the one holding the dagger. Caesar pulls his toga over his face and collapses at the feet of a statue of Pompey, his old rival. Poetic in the worst way. Now here's the twist. Brutus and the other conspirators thought this would be their moment, that the Roman people would cheer, that the Republic would be restored, that they'd walk home to standing ovations and confetti. Instead, silence. The crowd stares. The senators flee. And when Brutus tries to give a speech about how they freed Rome from tyranny, nobody's clapping. Mark Antony? He's furious. He delivers one of the most savage funeral speeches in history, waving Caesar's blood-soaked toga like a horror movie prop, reading Caesar's will, which, by the way, included cash handouts and public gardens for the people. Suddenly, Brutus and the gang looked less like heroes and more like monsters. The people riot. Brutus has to flee the city, and spoiler, things don't get better. He ends up dying by suicide after losing a battle against Antony and Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, who, a few years later, becomes the first emperor of Rome. So, yeah, the guy who tried to stop Rome from becoming an empire basically guaranteed that it would. Number 2, Benedict Arnold. Okay, if this was a movie, Benedict Arnold would be the guy who saves the day in Act 1 and sells out the entire team by Act 3. Because before he became America's most famous traitor, he was actually one of its best generals. Brave, brilliant, a natural leader, the kind of guy George Washington trusted completely, and whose name would eventually become shorthand for backstabbing Snake. But to understand how he went from Revolutionary War hero to British paid villain, you've got to start with his biggest enemy, his ego. Arnold grew up in a once prominent family that had lost everything. His dad drank their fortune away, and young Benedict swore he'd claw back every ounce of status they'd lost. And he did. By his mid-30s, he was a wealthy merchant, owning ships, trading across the Atlantic, and building one of the nicest houses in New Haven. Then the revolution hits, and Benedict's all in. The British tried taxing the colonies to cover war debts. Arnold, who already hated them for wrecking his business with trade restrictions, joins the Sons of Liberty and tells the local government to hand over the town's gunpowder, or else. Spoiler, they handed it over. Arnold led the charge to capture Fort Ticonderoga, fought through the Canadian wilderness to attack Quebec, and later built a navy from scratch on Lake Champlain just to slow down a British invasion. And at Saratoga, he basically won the entire battle, charging through enemy lines, getting shot, and having his leg crushed by a dying horse. That leg became a legend. Congress gave a medal to someone else. Arnold got crutches and a hospital stay. And this is where the resentment starts to build. Arnold feels overlooked, underpaid, and surrounded by idiots. He's constantly fighting with other officers. And Congress, which already hates that he's arrogant and loud, starts blocking his promotions. Meanwhile, George Washington keeps defending him because Washington knows this guy gets things done. But then Arnold meets Peggy Shippen, a beautiful, well-connected 18-year-old from a loyalist family. He's 37, nursing a shattered leg and a bruised ego. They fall in love, they get married, and Peggy just so happens to be pen pals with a charming British spy named Major John Andre. What could go wrong? By 1780, Arnold is broke, bitter, and still limping. Washington, maybe to cheer him up, gives him command of West Point, a key American fort on the Hudson River. Arnold's first move? Offer to sell it to the British for 20,000 pounds and a nice, cushy generalship. Yep, the man who once marched starving troops through the wilderness is now negotiating the sale of 3,000 soldiers and one of the most strategic forts in the entire war, all while his wife passes secret messages to a British spy. It almost works. Arnold meets Andre in secret. They finalize the plan. But then, Andre gets caught. And in a twist of absolute spy movie karma, the papers detailing West Point's defenses are literally found in his boots. Arnold gets tipped off just in time. He kisses his baby goodbye, hops on a boat, and sails off to the British ship Vulture. And just like that, the war hero becomes a traitor. Now, you'd think he'd get a warm welcome in Britain, maybe some fanfare, a few parades. Nope. Turns out even the British didn't really like him. Sure, they paid him, gave him a general's rank, but nobody respected him. Why? Because even they knew, if you betray your own country once, who's to say you won't do it again? Back in America, people lost their minds. Overnight, Benedict Arnold became the ultimate insult, and Congress even put up a monument to his leg. No name, just, here lies the good part. Andre, he was executed as a spy. Died with dignity, everyone said, which didn't help Arnold's reputation either. Arnold spent the rest of his life trying to restart his career, first in Canada, then in London, but the betrayal followed him everywhere. He ended up in debt, bouncing between failed business ventures, and was basically forgotten by the time he died in 1801. His last request? That he be buried in the uniform he wore when he fought for America, the one he wore before the betrayal. Legend says his final words were, "God forgive me for ever having put on another." Today, we remember Benedict Arnold not for all the battles he won, Not for the insane treks through the wilderness or the near suicidal charges at Saratoga, but for what he gave up: trust, honor, legacy. He had all of it and traded it away. Number 3. Ephialtes and the 300. Okay, even if you don't remember the name, you know the story here. 300 Spartans standing their ground against the most powerful army on Earth, holding a narrow pass for 3 days, buying time, dying as heroes. But behind that legend is one of the most cold-blooded betrayals in history. A local shepherd named Ephialtes told the Persians about a secret path around the Greek position, led them straight to the rear, and got every last defender killed. That name, Ephialtes, it literally became the Greek word for nightmare. So yeah, not exactly a national hero. But the man who doomed Leonidas might not have been pure evil. He was just poor, desperate, and smart enough to know his goat trail was worth more than gold. Let's break it down. Ephialtes lived in Trachis, a backwater mountain town in the Malian region of Greece. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a noble. He was a shepherd, a guy who wore animal hide wraps and slept in goat hair tents, following his flock through mountain passes and rocky trails. And that's what made him dangerous. Because unlike the highborn warriors in bronze armor, Ephialtes knew the back doors. He knew every hidden trail through the Malian cliffs, including one especially important 9-kilometer path over Mount Kallidromon called Anopeia. Locals had used it for years to raid neighbors. Now, it would flip the entire war. In August 480 BCE, Persian King Xerxes rolls in with the largest army the world had ever seen, possibly over 200,000 troops. His plan? Smash through the Greek mainland and crush all resistance. But at Thermopylae, things go sideways. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with a few thousand Greek allies, block a narrow coastal path only 100 meters wide. Xerxes throws wave after wave at them and gets absolutely wrecked. Even his elite troops, the Immortals, can't break the phalanx. Now, imagine you're Ephialtes, watching this bloodbath from your village, knowing the Persians are stuck and frustrated, and realizing you have the one thing that could turn the tide. So, on night 2 of the battle, Ephialtes walks into the Persian camp, offers them a deal. I can take you behind the Greeks. Just follow me. Xerxes is thrilled, sends his commander Hydarnes with a crack force of maybe 20,000 men, all led by one mountain shepherd who knew every stone on that ridge. They march at dusk, under a full moon, across cliffs and riverbeds. Ephialtes personally guides them over the Anopeia path, through tight trails and switchbacks, to the rear of the Greek line, and straight into legend. At dawn on day 3, the Greeks get the worst wake-up call imaginable. They've been flanked. Leonidas understands what's happening immediately. The narrow pass no longer matters. He dismisses most of his allies to escape, but he and his 300 Spartans stay, along with 700 Thespians who refuse to leave and 400 Thebans who may or may not have wanted to be there. And then the final stand begins. It's brutal, personal. The Spartans run out of spears, then swords, then start fighting with bare hands and teeth. Leonidas is killed early. His men fight just to retrieve his body. Eventually, they retreat to a small hill, Kolonos, where Persian archers unleash a storm of arrows until every last Greek is dead. And all of it, every death, every arrow, every bit of glory, happened because a shepherd showed the enemy the way. So, you're probably thinking he got a big fat reward for all of this, right? Well, after the Persian navy got crushed at Salamis a few weeks later, Ephialtes didn't get gold, or land, or anything. He got a bounty on his head, became a fugitive, fled to Thessaly, and roughly 10 years later, a man from his own hometown killed him. Not for the betrayal, but for something completely unrelated. The Spartans still rewarded the killer, but the shame lived on. His name was so cursed, Greeks literally started calling their nightmares Ephialtes. Imagine screwing up so badly you become the word for sleep paralysis. Now, was it all greed? Probably. But modern historians argue there might have been more to it. Ephialtes wasn't a soldier. He didn't owe loyalty to the Spartans or Athenians. He was poor, ignored, and living under the shadow of 2 empires. one that barely knew he existed, and one offering enough gold to lift his family out of poverty forever. He made a bet, a bad one, and it cost him everything.